spiritual awesomeness.
Hey, Mark, our guest in the chat room, Becky Glackenbuchko, is weighing in on what you're saying, and she says, yes, Dad was back and joking with 2 of my family members within 5.5 hours. Our conversations have been amazing as to what happens in heaven, how they interact, etc. I call it delicious because I really do not know another word that comes close to what it feels like. You don't get to choose to do this work. We aren't in control with that. I love that the new generations are more spiritual than religious. They are reaching out to help others and to accept others, not to sit and judge.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what Becky is telling us from the chat room, and that's some wonderful stuff. She's a wonderful lady.
Yeah, and she's right. The millenniums, which is the younger generation that's coming up, they're definitely not more. They're not only more intuitive than when I was growing up. They're consciously. They have a higher conscious. Like, they're not going to go out and just buy something to buy it because they like it. They want to actually know how a product was made. Did it impact the earth? Did it impact was something or someone killed to make this product? They're very conscious-minded about the planet that we live on, and they're very conscious about how the things that they purchase in life and the things that they're doing in life. They're just more conscious, and I think that's part of the spiritual paradigm shift is more and more people are coming into this higher consciousness, and whether it's spirituality, metaphysics, psychic, intuitive, clairvoyant, there's a whole bunch of different words, but people are starting to clue in, and I think society is more accepting nowadays. And we still have our struggles, but as far as the acceptance of a person's sexual orientation or their gender, what gender they want to be, there's more, the color of your skin. There is more acceptance today than there was when I was growing up. And one of the things I like to talk about as a guy, and for your listening audience out there, growing up, if you said that you were sensitive or you were feeling, as guys, we're not really raised to feel. And we're not. If we're feeling, then that makes us weak, and that makes us, cowards, or we could be gay because we're sensitive and feel. And really, it's just the opposite. And I've always been fascinated with the Native American culture because they could be warriors when they needed to, but they also loved their family. They respected the earth, and they tuned into their spiritual gifts, of what was around them, and honoring the spirit of those that have passed over, and honoring all the different energy, and respecting what they hunted and killed to live. And so I've always just been fascinated with the Native American culture because they had it right. And so I teach, I do a lot of mentoring for younger kids coming up, and tell them, feeling is healing, and that is okay. Don't buy into labels that are put on you because you're sensitive or you're an empath or you're feeling something, and trust your gut. Go with what you feel. Don't let the mind trick you out of what you need to do because you felt that it was the right thing to do, but then the mind tricked you and said, oh, you don't need to do that because, what are people going to say if you do that? Or, what are people going to do if you date this person or you say this thing? So feeling is healing.
Mark, there's a couple of things going on. One of our recent guests talked about 5D, about the shift. I think there's just an increasing awareness. I think we're reaching a sort of a critical mass where more and more people are achieving a spiritual awareness that hasn't happened before. I think that's going on. Some people, might call it Age of Aquarius, but there's a shift that way, a consciousness shift. And Becky points out here in the chat room that she has 2 daughters, 25 and 18. Both are activists. So many people are becoming involved in many things that are concerned with the earth and the environment, and with all of us growing spiritually.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I think, I think that the earth is changing, and definitely our species has a lot to do with that. I always talk in my sessions, as a species here on the earth, we're the only species that pays to live here, if you think about it. We're the only species that creates our own fear and our own drama. And we're the only species that actually breathes through our mouths, don't even breathe the right way of living and how we live our lives. We don't live our lives properly, just breathing, just the basic ways of breathing and interacting in your life. And when you look at that and you see the disruption, like the storm that's hitting D.C. right now, a very epic storm that's going on, and the weather patterns, and the shift that you were talking about, conscious shift taking place. We had this discussion a few weeks ago on one of the radio shows, and one of our guests, we were talking about that, and we were all in agreement that Mother Earth is going to survive. Mother Earth is the landlord, and we are the tenants, and we need to start paying attention to how good of a tenants we're being, both socially, both emotionally, both physically, what we're doing to each other, what we're doing to the land, because the landlord, as you well know, in today's society, can evict their tenants whenever they want. The landlord, or Mother Earth, is always going to survive. She has for millions of years. It's up to us on what we want to do moving forward, and for the future generations, what kind of environment do we want to leave for the millenniums and the generation to come behind the millenniums, and start being conscious about it, because we're going to get to a point where we can't go back. It's past the point of no return, as they say, and Mother Earth will evict us if she needs to, and we're seeing that. I think we're going to see that in 2016 with some pretty, epic storms. We're already seeing the first one. We've had a hurricane in January in the Atlantic, which hasn't been on record for many years. Here, even in Seattle, we've been having some very interesting earthquakes and seismology quakes going down below the surface. In fact, we just had a 2.7 earthquake in the middle of the state, which is unheard of, and we had a mini tsunami hit the Pacific beach coast, which is here in Washington State, from an event that took place offshore. So, the world is going to always be changing and shifting. We just have to decide as tenants if we're going to be good tenants, or is Mother Earth going to evict us, because the year of 2016 is also in numerology the last year of the cycle, which is a year focused in on forgiveness, rest. It's also called the Great Humanitarian, and usually when there's a call for great humanitarian and compassion, that's usually through tragedies and major events like earthquakes, like big snowstorms, like tsunamis, and kind of like what we saw in Japan a few years ago with all the devastation in 2011. 2016 is going to have some of those same effects, but it's a calling for people to be the compassionate humanitarian and come together and pull together, because we can be so much better than what we're doing right now.
And you mentioned the Native Americans earlier. They were very much in touch with the earth and with nature, and there's so much that we can learn from the Native Americans' interrelationship with nature, from how they interacted with nature.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, the Native Americans had it right. The indigenous cultures had it right. You even saw, I don't know if you had watched the Golden Globes a couple weeks ago, even Leonardo DiCaprio, when he got his Golden Globe, he didn't do an acceptance speech about how great of an actor he was. He actually paid tribute for his film, The Revenant, on thanking the spiritual, the indigenous people for what they are going through to still stand up for their lands and not let corporations take their lands. We always talk about, and that's what we were talking before the show, Rich, and sometimes spirit has things that aren't planned. And, what I love about doing radio is some of the improv. And, we always talk about the genocides in history that take place from World War II and what the Nazis did to the Jews. But the one that always seems to get swept under the rug is what we did here in America to the Native Americans and the millions and millions of people that were wiped out from poverty, disease, being killed in wars over the years in our claim to, stake this land here in America. And, it's one of the genocides that's not talked about a lot. And the Native Americans had it right. They really did. And here comes the white man, and he puts his stake in the ground and says, I own this land. Well, you don't own anything. When you go into spirit, you don't get to take this big, nice house with you. You don't get to take that fancy car with you. You come in naked. You go back naked. So they had it right.
You stumbled upon a key concept that I'd like to explore briefly, and that is that predatory capitalism is, in fact, essentially evil in nature. And the white Europeans brought that here. Corporate America is exploiting it now. The war on the middle class and lower classes that corporate America is engaged in. Many of my shows dealing with e-commerce and with the debacle at eBay in recent years deal with that, but it's all over the place. If you look at what Bernie Sanders represents, and Becky Buchko is a big fan of Bernie Sanders, and I've listened to a lot of what Bernie has to say, and I agree with a great deal of it, and you contrast that, for example, with the Republican banking oil industry billionaire Donald Trump type thing. That's the contrast, you know, and I don't usually get into politics, and we're not going to get into it tonight, but from a spiritual point of view, our earth can support everybody. There's enough here to go around. The predatory greed capitalism of a few 1%ers grabbing all of the wealth and then keeping everybody else on a poverty level, that's got to go. You know, that's ancient history. It's time for a big change economically worldwide, and that's my piece that I'm going to say on that.
well, yeah, especially when it comes to politics, because that's one thing, you know, in my spiritual practice that's changed also as part of my transformation is I used to be very into politics and you know, believe in what they said, and I've really come to learn that if you're either of the left wing or the right wing, it's all the same bird. And for me, you know, it was interesting to hear Bernie Sanders say political revolution. It goes back to our forefathers in the Constitution. You know, Thomas Jefferson talking about every 100 years there should be a revolution so you don't have the big banks and you don't have the rich getting rich and the poor getting poorer. And that's part of the brokenness of what we're seeing in today's society. Even the politics is now just a circus show of watching these debates. It's just one big circus. And, you know, at the end of the day, going back to what I said about Mother Earth being the landlord, that all goes by the wayside when, you know, you have somebody that's transitioned and, you know, died and gone into spirit. You know, that's the important things of life really start to come up, and politics is definitely not one of them. That's actually one of the things that people could care less about when they're going through a tragedy or a loss of a loved one. You know, the gun rights, you know, because my brother was taken from us from a legally purchased gun. So I always pay attention to the big conversations and the debates that are going on for gun control and Second Amendment, and, you know, because I have a personal tie to that. So I definitely can understand where some of that passion comes from. But like I've learned and transformed through that, it doesn't matter if you're of the left wing or the right wing, it's all still one bird, and we need to figure it out or this bird's not going to be flying much longer.
Becky Black and Boots Co. in our chat room had some more things to say. She says,
okay.
I did not out myself about the metaphysical abilities until my youngest turned 18 to protect her against bullying, etc. My life was amazing, and until recently I could not even allude to it. Living in an area that is racist and homophobic, I still get attacked for my beliefs. I finally decided that it is my cost for the work that I do, and as long as my girls are not here, I'm fine with it. Then she mentions weighing in with what we were talking about a few minutes ago. Global warming is absolutely real. 2016 is a prime example of it. This was our first real snow of this winter. She's there in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. Normally, you know, Pennsylvania by this time is already experiencing a great deal of snow. Apparently, they're just now having their first real snow in Johnstown.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, compared to last year, they didn't have hardly any, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think from a science standpoint, 2015 was the actual warmest year now on recorded history. So the Earth is warming up. The Earth is changing, and through that warmth, even by 1 degree, you know, with the rise of the oceans, from a science standpoint, people better start paying attention, especially if you live along coastal lines. You know, if that, you know, temperature continues to rise, that means that more water is coming our way. So you might have lakefront property in Montana at one point, or oceanfront property if we're not careful.
Barbara Strassand's house out in Malibu used to have this beautiful beach in front of it, and now the ocean's right at her doorstep. You know, she's got one of those big houses up on stilts.
Yeah, and they're saying by late 2030 that the way that the Antarctic is shrinking and the way that the glaciers are completely gone. They're saying that I was just watching a show last night in Montana, Glacier National Park. They said by 2025, all the glaciers in Montana are going to be gone. And that park was actually, you know, back during I believe it was the Truman presidency, that they actually had made that a federal park to protect the glaciers and everything up there in northern Montana. And now, you know, you get, you know, 100 years later, and the glaciers are going to be gone.
Well, the Arctic Circle has what, shrunk 30-40% just in the past 30 or 40 years?
Oh yeah, yeah. They've and just the aerial photos of when they look down and how the ice is breaking apart and the big ice sheets are getting thinner and yeah, and people got to realize that if that takes place, then the sea levels rise and that means it's coming ashore. So.
Well, and you look at a city like New Orleans that it's below sea level to begin with as far as the elevation is concerned. We've got problems along all the coastlines. I agree. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's becoming mindful, and I think we're making small moves. I know here I just recently moved into Seattle back in September, brought my healing and spiritual practice down here into the city, and they're really good, at least as far as from a composting. Seattle's very, very liberal in the ways of one, we're the coffee capital of the world, but two, we're very liberal in the fact that everything has to be recycled. So outside I've got 4 different bins. One has to be clean recyclables, the other one has to be compost and food waste, wood. And if we don't do that, they actually starting in 2016 will start fining you. And so I don't know how that bolds for the rest of the country, but people are starting to take note. Even the trash that we're putting into landfills, and I think Japan has even created a trash island where they've actually have created so much trash and compacted it that it's actually its own little island now, and they're building on that.
Are you familiar with that huge mass out in the Pacific Ocean that's composed of? Yeah, it can be seen by satellite and by aerial views, and it's massive. I mean, ships actually have to navigate around it.
Yeah, and they've done cleanups. I was watching a special on that actually, and it might have been on Nat Geo or one of those channels, and they were showing where volunteers would go into Hawaii, one of the Hawaiian islands, and they would go one day and they would spend all day picking up plastic, and it's mostly plastic is the culprit. They would go through, they'd clean up the plastic. The next morning, the beach would be littered again, based on the way the tides are working. It's hitting one of the Hawaiian islands out there, and so they're cleaning it up every day because there's just so much garbage out in the ocean, and that not only impacts the shipping lanes, but just think of the ocean life that's impacting as far as the whales and the dolphins and all of the sea life that is and that's us, that's man-made. We are impacting an ecosystem. What comes to mind is there's a picture where it shows you got an ecosystem and an ecosystem, and the ecosystem shows the man at the top of the pyramid, and everything else is second to man, and that's an ecosystem. Where an ecosystem is the man is in the middle, and everything is around the man, because we're all interconnected, and we can't do this by ourselves. And so that's just kind of what was flashing in my mind real quick when you said that. Is we can either be an ecosystem or we can be an ecosystem.
That's a good play on words there, too. Mark, you were mentioning the Japan thing earlier. Becky's got a question from the chat room.
Okay.
She says, is that debris field from the Japan tsunami?
Yes and no. It was actually there before the nuclear disaster in 2011. I know that the disaster is specifically here in Seattle because the tides, 3,000 miles away, the tides directly come towards us. What they are seeing from the impact is the fish. The fishing industry is starting to see a lot of mutated fish. A lot of the catch that's coming in is half of it is sometimes spoiled because it's just rotten. It's just they pull fish up and they're just rotting from the inside out. But to answer your question, Becky, the debris field, the plastic, I think they call it Plastic Island. Do you remember what they called it, Rich? I think it's called Plastic Island, but it was there before the disaster in 2011 hit Japan.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Mark, what has been the biggest gift or blessing that following the path has brought you?
Well, as I sit here in my studio here in Seattle, Washington, I think that's a blessing and a gift to be able to, one, come into the city and have a house, just have a house in general. There are people around the world that don't have houses. But doing this work, I don't know, for me, whether I'm doing the radio show every week, whether I'm doing readings, it's helping others, it's serving others, it's promoting an awesome lifestyle for what I call spiritual prospectors, because the concept of the prospector, and that's why I created it, and that's why I call it the intuitive